So, welcome to the show. Our voices, our stories. A show dedicated to sharing real experiences, powerful perspectives, and the journeys that shape us who we are. Brought to you by Butch and Flat Shadow Productions, a show where every voice matters and every story deserves to be heard. So, without further ado, welcome, Butch. I want to kick it all off by letting you tell everyone a little bit about yourself and how you would describe your experiences growing up as a gay man.
Great. First of all, thank you, Scotty, Flat Shadow Productions, for joining me in this unique opportunity that I have decided to venture down the road on. Growing up in Southwest Virginia in the mountains, a lot of people will first say, well, where's the name Butch come from? Well, I'm a country boy, and Butch was a country name. So that's what they call me from the day I was born. It's been an interesting life with a name as a gay man being Butch and the laughter. And, you don't live up to the Marlboro Man image kind of a thing. But, I tried at one point to go by my middle name, and then I forgot when people would be asking, I'd be like, who's Warren? And where is he? And so I was like, yeah, I better stick with Butch. Anyway.
I'm a middle namer.
Are you?
I'm a middle namer, yep.
Okay.
My great-grandmother named me.
Yeah.
My first name is Michael.
Oh, okay.
So
yeah.
I do go by Scott. But
It's
that was just a little pun in there.
Interesting how our parents do those things to us.
Right. Right. Little they know.
Right. Yeah. So, I grew up a good kid in the mountains in Southwest Virginia. I went to church every Sunday. It was right across the street from Grandma's house. I grew up in a Methodist church. Everybody, all 82 people there, were related to me in some way, shape, or form. And I never heard all of that fire and brimstone. I don't think I ever heard the word homosexual or gay in my church growing up. That was not a thing.
Was it hidden?
I think it probably was hidden, and there were undertones, when I look back on those times and everything, and I can think of some instances where, a lot of people used to say, he's a silly boy, referring to me, or he's a little loosey-goosey. And, I didn't understand that. I just thought, I was me. I was skinny as I could be. I wasn't like any of my other male cousins who were into sports and everything. In fact, my father got me to play hockey when I was young, and my mother decided to make me take piano lessons. So I guess they were trying to balance me in that and everything. It was an interesting time playing hockey, that's for sure. I was not a rough and tumble kind of guy.
Where I grew up, it was more of we didn't talk about it.
Yeah.
It was, and there was people that were in the community and the town that I was raised in that knew we're different.
Yeah.
But yet it was not addressed. As far as I know, it wasn't addressed with me. But I did my best to keep up with the normals, or I did my best to keep up with the athletes. I did my best to keep up with the friends
Exactly.
and do what they are doing, because I didn't want anybody to know that I was even small or remotely different.
Yeah, I never really questioned sexuality because I didn't really know anything about sexuality when I was growing up. When you get to be that 12, 13 years old, you start to wonder why you like this a little bit more than that and everything. And of course, as a young kid, I experimented. But I still didn't understand it. I was still convinced I'm supposed to grow up, go to college, get a degree, take over the family business, and have 2.5 children. And that was my intention. I thought when I went into college, I really thought that's just a phase you go through in college for a man, and eventually I figured out that no, it's not a phase, that this is really where my heart lies, as I enjoy the company of other men. It's not that I don't like women at all. In fact, I got married when I was in college, and my friends were like, you need to come out to your wife. It's not fair for her to live the life that you're living. It's not fair for you to live the life that you're making her live, and all of that. So I did come out, and it was a hard time. And
so that was the next question. That what has that journey of coming out been like? And how is your community, your
Yeah.
family, how have they responded?
It was very difficult when I finally came out. I only came out to really my college friends. Didn't feel comfortable even coming out to my high school friends. I just kind of had let them drift away. And when my wife and I both graduated and we ultimately lost our baby, and that meant to me at that point, God was punishing me for being gay.
Do you think that was from your upbringing?
I don't know if it was from my upbringing or not, or just society. You know, I remember hearing so much about what's the crazy orange juice lady, Anita Bryant.
Okay.
You know, she scared me. She
Mm.
was an icon, you know, for orange juice and everything. And she scared me growing up because, you know, I thought maybe I am gay. And she's telling me I shouldn't be and maybe I shouldn't be and everything. But homosexuality, gay, was never really discussed in the presence of other people, you know, my peers or anything. I didn't know anybody. I didn't know what a gay person looked like, talked like, or whatever because
Right.
it was not something I grew up with.
Same.
But, you
Same.
know, after we lost our child, I really went into that depression of it's because I'm gay. And what do I do about this now?
I've told my family stories about things of that same nature with not understanding and punishment from, and I was raised in a church, you know, Bible stories, Sodom and Gomorrah, you know, all that stuff was a story and an opinion of somebody that I looked up to.
Right.
But, you know, recently with events that I've dealt with now, I've talked to people, family, and said, I have laid down when I was younger and dealing with this internally and laid down and said, I want to be normal. I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm going to church. I'm saying my prayers. I'm not cussing. I'm doing these things that I'm supposed to be doing. Please make me normal.
Yes. Yes. I want to be normal.
Right. That was a lot of my early teen years.
Yeah.
A whole lot.
I remember, you know, I never told my parents that I was gay, and that's why my wife and I were divorcing. My parents just naturally assumed we had lost our child and it was too hard on the relationship. And I let that go on like that. It was easier to let them think that than it was to be worried about what shame might become of me and everything. You know, even though my college friends knew, and probably, as I've learned later in life, my high school friends knew all along. They just didn't bother to tell me back then. But it was 2 years later in 1986 that I tested positive for HIV and AIDS. And once again, that whole thing sunk back in. God is punishing me for being gay. And it took a while. I think I had accepted the term gay, but I had not known what that really meant inside of my spirit and where that was going to lead me. I really thought back then you didn't have a lot of options in HIV and AIDS. I really thought I would be dead and gone in a few years. So I just kind of went along with the crowd and partied.
But it seems like that. And this is just stories because I was in school, I was hearing the stories, but yet it was more swept under the rug.
Yes.
And it was, let's not talk about this because we don't know any answers. This is personal. This is what I thought. You know, looking back on that time now, you know, there were articles, there were shows, there were things that you could read about it, but it was not paid attention to.
Yeah. Well, you like me, growing up in a small town,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and when I tested positive and the doctor looks at me and says, I don't know what to tell you other than to get your affairs in order. And I'm like, I'm 26 years old. What affairs do I have?
Right.
And I knew I couldn't keep this to myself because I needed to share with someone. Well, be careful who you trust in life because I shared it with someone and, you know, within hours, everybody in the gay community in my small town knew, which meant then that I was being shunned. You know, people didn't want to touch me. People didn't want to hug me. People didn't want to go anywhere out with you.
They didn't know anything about it.
And it would just happen to San Francisco, New York, Washington, D.C. Those were the places where you were seeing it all. And so it was It was very challenging, and I knew at that point I needed to get out of that small town. I picked up and moved to Atlanta, and it was fun and wonderful as a young gay man in a city with lots of gay bars and gay people. And, since I didn't really know a whole lot about gay anything, dressing, haircut styles, all that kind of stuff, there was a lot to learn from this country boy from Virginia necessarily. And I had a lot of fun, but it was after a few years, I found a doctor there that I truly think helped to save my life very much. Dr. Morris, and he's now out in Las Vegas, no, Palm Springs. And he's a great man and still stay in touch with him. But he helped me to realize that I could stay alive. I just needed to learn to take care of myself and to watch what I was doing. And that included your partying and everything.
Right.
These were party times. These were circuit party days and all that. And I found myself ended up working in HIV and AIDS at a nonprofit organization in Atlanta. And that is when I really started to discover who I was, what my talents were as a person, how to communicate effectively with people. I started off in fundraising for an organization, and it was a lot of fun. A lot of drag queens raising money for AIDS, standing on the corners collecting money. Anywhere we could get money, we were getting it because we needed it. To try to save lives back then, or to try to provide alternatives and whatever else we could do.
So I've got to throw in. You had mentioned before we had talked about how you described yourself to your therapist, and I think that it's really important that everybody knows this because a lot of us have sort of we're very insecure. We have insecure issues. So I want you to say.
Yeah, I was seeing a therapist to help me maneuver through this HIV gay male thing. And he asked me one day to describe myself. And I said, well, I'm a gay man, white, HIV positive. And then I just kind of stopped. And he looked at me and he said, why did you stop? And why is that at the top of your list? And I thought, well, I don't understand the question really. And he was like, no, why do you say AIDS is like the number 4 thing that you describe yourself as? And I said, well, I guess that's the way I see myself. And he's like, so what happened to being honest and funny and caring and loving and fun to be with and a good friend, a good son, a good brother and all those things? And I thought, wow, you just challenged me. And that was probably it was a real big turning moment in my life where I had to start saying, I'm not just a person living with AIDS. I'm a man with all these other great qualities, and I happen to be living with AIDS.
I love that.
A lot of people weren't living with it anymore.
I love that.
And I needed to accept that. And kind of I saw that then as a responsibility to start to share my story through my work in HIV and AIDS, and I did that, after I got done with fundraising, all of a sudden I found myself in peer counseling. And that really opened my eyes. I was peer counseling young people, 18 years old, testing positive. I was peer counseling heterosexual Black women who had gotten HIV because their husbands were on the down low. Right. I was visiting people in the hospital that were finding out when they were there for something else, finding out that they're HIV positive. And I started training peer counselors for Atlanta then. And I would say that's probably one of the best jobs that I ever had because I was good at it. I was compassionate. I understood. I helped people walk into their HIV test and go through the fear when you had to wait a couple of days to get the results. And I just stood by people and helped change their lives. I was emanating who I am. I'm alive. You can be alive too.
Right.
I'm not saying it's always easy.
Right.
Every day you got to take a pill. I still take pills.
Right.
But the point is, I'm still here. There's still a reason. There's still something I've got to accomplish.
And you're making so much difference in this community. I just have to say that before we go on.
Thank you.
I think there's a whole lot of people that you have impacted and even inspired in this community. So thank you for that.
I try, when I decided to retire early, which was a fortunate thing that I'd be able to do. I thought, where does a gay man go when he retires early? And I thought, okay, you either go to Palm Springs or Fort Lauderdale or something like that. And Palm Springs was way too hot for me. So I went to Fort Lauderdale. Well, guess what? It's still hot in Fort Lauderdale. And I stayed in Fort Lauderdale the first year. It was like being back in Atlanta, kid in a candy store, bars all over the place, But I wasn't happy. I wasn't content. I volunteered in Fort Lauderdale for an AIDS organization there, a food pantry, and did a lot of fundraising with them. But then it just became clear this wasn't where I was supposed to be. This wasn't where I was going to spend the rest of my life. And I asked my sister, what do you think? I don't want to go to another big town. I don't want to move back where I came from. And she said, have you ever thought about Asheville? And I said, Lord, last time I was in Asheville, it was like 25 years ago, and it was just this podunk town. She's like, you haven't been in a while. It's a fun little place. You're going to like it. We're going to meet there. We met one weekend up here in Asheville, and within 2 days, I said, this is home. The arts were great. I loved it, and I felt at home. I felt like I was in Hippieville. And, I grew up in the 60s and 70s, so I was comfortable with being like, a hippie in some ways. It made me feel good. The biggest thing, I think, was coming from a big city and then to a small town in a smaller gay community where you also don't have as much to do. And I moved here not knowing a single person.
So tell me how being diagnosed with HIV, how did that play out with your family?
Well, it didn't for a couple of years, to be honest. I was, of course, scared to tell my family that I was HIV positive. And honestly, not a lot of people knew. More people knew than I wanted to know because you got to watch who you trust. But I remember I was having to go through, some doctor's appointments and things when I first tested positive. And I was working for my father at the time at a construction company. And my father called me in and asked me one day, why are you missing so much work? What's going on with you? You seem to be going to the doctor a lot. And I said, well, Dad, I have AIDS. And Dad said, why do you have AIDS? And I said, well, because I'm a gay man. And that's how I contracted AIDS. And my father looked at me and said, you need to take the rest of the week off and we will talk about this another time.
That had to be one of the hardest things that you've ever had to do.
It was, it's weird. It was humiliating because I never wanted to have to ever disappoint my father.
Yeah.
And in that moment, I just felt like I've let him down. Just like I've let a lot of people down from the other things, God was punishing me. So what I kept going back to, and this is, how am I going to get through this now? It was clear then that once I told my father that, the rest of my family needed to know, my mother and my sister. And, my mother's always been one of those, okay, I hear you. Let's talk about something else.
Mm-hmm.
My sister was she is a couple years younger than me. And she was kind and she wasn't cruel or anything. And she tried, and she has become my best friend in this world through all of this and many other things that we've gone through. But it's challenging to let people that you love, who you think are going to look down on you, you just assume they're going to look down on you automatically. That's the way society had brought many of us up, had brought me up at least.
Right. Me too.
Yeah.
I get it.
So, I will say that thanks to the very good heart of my stepmother, who I love dearly, she educated herself and she educated my father. And we never really talked about specifics around it. We talked about, what are you going to do? What does your doctor say? Those kinds of things. But nothing ever got more specific about that. And in fact, we never really even talked about me being gay. It just became, you're my son. I love you. Well, that's life.
The way it should be.
The way it should be for every single person. It doesn't matter who you love.
Right.
It doesn't matter how you love. It matters that you find somebody. I remember my first partner that I had for a long term, and my dad said, the one thing I like about Keith? And I said, what? And he said, He only talks when he needs to. I said, you know what, Dad, that's a good characteristic. He said, yeah, I wish my wife would do that. I thought, we related on different levels of just personalities like that and everything. And my dad was, once I started to move into HIV work, my dad was very, very kind to me and told me many times how proud he was of me. He donated to whatever campaigns I may be looking for, because he knew that that was important to me, that that was my life's dream to fulfill moving forward with my compassion. That's why I still do it today. I often laugh. I think back to when I was in, I think it was maybe 7th or 8th grade, and we organized a dance-a-thon at our junior high school to raise money for Easter seals. And I was part of the organization or all the people that organized it and everything. And I was so excited because I got to go on TV and present this check for $500 to the Easter Seal Society, And that was a big deal in 1976, And I thought that's where it was born. As I got older, I looked back and I realized I got this from my family, my compassion, my charity. My family has always been good at giving to other people, lifting them up when they were down, giving them a helping hand. My father even moved a family in with us into our house when they had gotten so downtrodden that they lost their home. And so, he did things like that his whole life. He would, a worker couldn't pay all their bills. He would give them some money to pay all their bills. He was good like that. And he was good to us as a family too. And I'm blessed that I have that character from him and that I'm able to, he always comes to mind when I'm doing things about the good that I'm trying to do for the world. I think that's who he was. He was just trying to do good in life and have a little bit of fun while he was doing it.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So let's take 10. What I want to do is when we come back, I want to talk about Asheville.
Okay.
Is that cool?
Yeah, we can talk about Asheville.
Cool.
There's a lot to talk about.
All right. We'll be back.